Good morning and welcome to this post today. So I wanted to share with you guys some of my ideas about what life can begin to look like when we start healing from trauma symptoms. So the two words that always come to my mind, and I try to help clients also connect with in their bodies and within their part system, is this really simple idea of energetic potential. So what do I mean by energetic potential? When we start to look at the nervous system and the way that our bodies expend energy into survival responses, and the way that our parts, often very much younger parts that have got themselves coded or contracted into these survival responses to create safety, find that they don't have any way out. So the only way they know how to be safe is to be, and we might find these typically more anxious, hyper-aroused presentations, that they only know how to expend their energy into survival responses. So when we look at the different strands of survival responses in the nervous system, we have different options. So there is a menu. And for all of us, we might have one that we tend to use a little bit more than others. So the menu that our body has to choose from is fight, flight, freeze, flop, or to feign. So the fight, flight, and freeze response sits within the sympathetic nervous system strand, which means that there is a lot more adrenaline being pumped through the body. The cognition within the brain is working at a different type of speed to if we were more dorsally triggered into the flop position. So the way that we can begin to start to map this energetic drain that we want to transform into energetic potential is to begin to notice what's happening in our body when we go through our day-to-day life, just in really little micro moments. So first of all, it's identifying, as said, which survival responses are your go-to. So I'd really recommend doing some research. Now, people that write a lot about this are people like Janina Fisher, Stephen Porges, Deb Dana, Peter Levine. There is a really, really amazing plethora of great authors out there who are doctors in their field and can really address these things from a very biological level, whilst also integrating more of the psychological and mind-based integration that we need when we're working with mind-body, so we can understand what it is that's happening at any moment. So just to bring us back to this idea of energetic potential and how our bodies can become drained energetically. Now, those survival responses that sit within the sympathetic strand of the nervous system, the flight, flight, and freeze response, will use up a huge amount of energy. Now, I often work with clients that present with things like fibromyalgia or chronic pain. And for them, their part system sits within this polarization. And, many other people do as well, when we start to really have a look and understand the duality of the body and how these survival responses have a way of trying to kind of intrinsically balance one another out, but it creates belief systems about ourselves. So when we expend all our energy daily into those survival responses, it's very normal for the body then to go into a collapse. And that looks like overwhelm, burnout, and exhaustion. Now, this presentation can happen for some people across many, many years. They maintain this super, super hyper arousal within the body. And it may be that different points in their life, they've also used different self-medicating things like caffeine or cocaine or alcohol to down-regulate or up-regulate the body. So in some sort of way, it's almost like we need to start to build a sense of trust towards the instinct that the body is driving us towards. It doesn't necessarily mean that those survival responses are needed, but there's a piece of the story that we need to integrate. Now, that's where parts work is so helpful, because it allows us to find a way to externalize these parts with really complex belief systems that might sound a little bit like, if I can achieve this goal, then I can create safety for myself. But that goal always continually moves ahead. And I've talked a little bit about that as like an inner critic part in a previous post. But also when we look, I was just mentioning a moment ago about fibromyalgia and chronic pain and inflammation within the body. Now, the doingness, the busyness of a state of being can drive us down into that dorsal flop. So this is where the body is trying to balance itself out. And as said previously, addiction patterns can often be a way of trying to self-medicate or finding more maladaptive coping mechanisms to balance the body out. Now, there are other choices, and part of being in therapy is beginning to notice, what survival response am I going in? And is it necessary? Or is it a piece of a story that's becoming reenacted and repeated? And am I stuck into that trauma vortex where I'm unable to differentiate from the past and the present moment? So back to that parts work piece, we want to build a language with those parts internally about what it is that they're perceiving. So what is it that they find is triggering them? So we want to work out what your cues of safety and your cues of danger are. So when we go back to this original point of potential energetic potential, there's something about being really self-aware. And again, just to weave back fibromyalgia and chronic pain, that when people find themselves in that flop position, that can be really scary. It can be really terrifying. It may feel like the body is even betraying you, because your very survival imperative is to be in that more action-based survival response. So when you're down there in that dorsal and that sense of depression is starting to rise up, really notice how that flop position part can get pushed down even harder by those inner critics judging the collapse. Now, the collapse was needed because there's effectively a burnout. And yes, there are ways to begin to change this energetic pattern, which is to consider, when I'm in burnout, I've used up energy, and when I need to rest, so to move into the dorsal strand of the nervous system when my body is in a rest and digest state, I need to be able to rest myself so that I can redirect my energy into a different track of experience, not into the survival response anymore, but actually into something different, into something safe. So that sense of safety is one of those first steps in trauma treatment, where we want to stabilize your nervous system and get to know a little bit about those parts. So I want to really help people unhook themselves from the myth that they are lazy, that they are not worth anything when they're in that collapse state, but that to actually really trust in your body. Your body is trying to counteract the energetic drain that happens when we are in chronic hyperarousal. Of course, what goes up has to come down. So when we start to become more balanced and we can really see the yo-yoing within the nervous system and the parts of ourselves that may be in internal conflict often. So here we have that dorsal flop and the internal conflict of the part that's saying, I've got to fly, I've got to get out of here to be safe. But this part is saying, well, there's no energy left. The gas in the engine is empty. All I can do is go into this disassociative flop. And that yo-yoing in trauma can be really, really, really helpful to begin to notice that this is a muscle. So what happens here is the vagal brake, the parasympathetic strand of the nervous system, is coming on and offline. And then at this point, I will direct you towards Deb Dana's book on the Polyvagal Theory, which is very accessible and goes into a lot of the biology and some really great ideas around how to begin to map your own nervous system. And if you're working with a therapist that's trained in Polyvagal Theory, then hopefully that can happen in that relationship too. But having some curiosity about this incredible thing that we have that is our body, and beginning to trust that what's happening is in response to something that's happening in the other direction. So it's counteracting. So in the same way that we have this energetic drain, we have energetic potential. What would it be like instead of this energy being drained into survival responses? And when we start to unhook these belief systems about being lazy or having low self-worth or not feeling good about ourselves because we're in the collapse or the flop position, but actually in that collapse and flop position, noticing how much rest may have been needed for many, many years. And that the less we go up here and use survival responses in sympathetic, we're less likely to go into that dorsal dissociative numbing flop. So with that energetic potential, when we start to integrate parts with their belief systems and help them reorientate towards the present moment and the relationships that may just be at our fingertips that can help nurture us and take on a different perspective, we can take that energetic potential and start to unhook that myth about being lazy, because it just isn't true. You know, if you were to have met yourself 3 days before the flop and dorsal collapse response, you probably were burning bright like a star, but you may well have been in a survival response. So your light and your energetic output was being directed into your survival responses as opposed to nurturance, or into relationship, or into exploring or play or creativity. So we can transform that energetic output from survival responses, from surviving, into more modes of thriving, interacting with others, the world around you, in a way that feels right. There is no rush to shift from the yo-yoing. It's just that your well-being will increase when we start to create more balance and stability within your body. But this journey of stabilization is very individual. I often get asked, you know, how long will treating trauma take? And even not just trauma, but, you know, any mental health struggle that you might have. It will take time, and there is no definitive fixed piece that suddenly, you know, that hunger for certainty. So this may help to kind of frame it like this, that hunger for certainty is in of itself, if we worked with that as a part, that sense of urgency being driven from potentially a survival response. But when we create a sense of calm in our bodies, within ourselves, within our parts, it's as though everything comes at ease then. There is trust within the self and within others. And this is the healing part relationally, which takes time in trauma, is building that trust in towards the body again and towards other people, to begin to move forward with ease, as opposed to moving in and out of those survival responses. So in short, after a fairly long explanation, is I really wanted to shine a light on this idea of energetic potential, and to help you unburden the myth of when you're in that dorsal low flat place, how tender it is to be there, and just to know that the parts that come forward and start to give you those negative self messages, they're just there trying to remobilize you back into that survival response up in the sympathetic strand. But that's going to leave you back again. So they're woven together. And actually what we want to start to do is to create new and different experiences in the body, so that we can begin to imagine and dream and create vision of different experiences. So I'm not going to continue life doing this, and the parts that are projecting their fears into this reality are being soothed and supported and loved and contained and boundaried, so that they actually can move into that thriving position. So hopefully that's all made sense, but I'm always really happy to answer questions if you're curious about the treatment of trauma, or if you have any ideas that you'd like me to talk about as well. I'm really open to working co-creatively. So thank you for your time.